reality is not dictated by a deity. It's developed from empathy, dependence, and love. My morality accepts everybody's sexuality, is more concerned with inequality and the validations from above. My morality is not set into stone tablets.
Welcome to the Nuns. I am Sister Shara. We have with us Sister Lilandra.
Hello.
We have a couple of guests that we have here today. We're going to talk about some of the pseudoscience that people bring to the. Aron's face is big. We are going to be talking about some of the pseudoscience that creationists will bring to the table to try to prove that evolution is wrong when discussing things with you or debating. So we brought in a bunch of different varying degrees of knowledgeable people on science so that we can get a lot of different kinds of answers that people might present to some of these arguments. First of all, we have JD Stockman, and he is a writer for Yahoo Voices. He's known as the Godless Voice, and he I lost his thing that he gave me for his intro, but he is an amazing writer, and he talks a lot about anti-theism. He has now recently changed to what he calls an epistivist, which has been coined by
not changed, included.
So it's a qualifier.
It's qualifier, yeah.
Okay.
It's an extension of atheism.
Yes, it's basically a lack of faith. You don't use faith in your
No, I'm a journalist. It'd be against the rules.
We also have with us DPRJones. He is from YouTube, and he has a lot of subscribers. He does really awesome videos on all different kinds of subjects. My favorite ones have always been on the healthcare system in America. He has been on the stage with Richard Dawkins. He's a very intelligent person when it comes to making arguments against morality that the Christians will say that we can't have. And you can go ahead and say hi, DPR.
Thank you very much for those kind words, and thanks for having me on the show.
And he's also from the Magic Sandwich Show, but that doesn't matter. You don't want to watch that, please. And then we have with us Aron Ra, and he really doesn't need much of an introduction, but I have one on here. My problem is all of his thing is really long. You want me to say the whole thing, Aron? Be nice if the computer worked. Is he muted? No.
Yeah, you gave a good enough introduction when you said all of his thing is really long. Just leave it at that.
This is true. Well, we know him from YouTube. I know that part. The thing that I know most about him is that he's very educated on how to argue these creationist points. And he's got a great series on YouTube that Daniel watches religiously. Basically, he is very capable of tackling this from the smart viewpoint, I guess, because my views on evolution, like, I can understand when something's wrong, but I cannot, for the life of me, know how to argue them properly, and so I'm hoping that Aron can explain to me how to argue these people a little bit better. So there's Aron Ra.
Do we have an audience chat yet?
I do not know. If no one has put it through, have they? Shared, yes.
If I can just warn you, Shara, whilst you're doing that, years of experience on the Magic Sandwich Show has taught me that Aron and mute buttons are not two things that are compatible. He will either not mute or mute when he shouldn't.
Anyways, a lot of times people they run across arguments that they can't answer, pseudoscience arguments. Most atheists I know are smart people. They can answer questions about the Bible. They can rebut a apologetics, but they flounder with the science question. Here's an example right here of what I'm talking about. This is Ray Comfort. Everybody's familiar with him. He's on the street, and he comes across Ryan. He's an agnostic, and he asks him, why does he believe in evolution?
Is this something that he staged?
Can you guys see the video?
Yeah.
Okay. Tell me if you can hear the video. Just a sec. Just watch the video and then comment.
Yeah, nice and loud?
Yeah.
Okay. Why do you believe in evolution?
It just seems like a logical thing because, I mean,
Can't see the video.
there's so much
Evidence?
Okay, you guys can't see the video?
Nope. But we can hear it. That should be sufficient, I think. It's a conversation, so.
Just a second.
There it goes. Now it's popping in.
All right. Let me start over. Hold what you're gonna say till after the video, okay?
Sorry, first time.
Okay.
Why do you believe in evolution?
It just seems like a logical thing because, I mean, there's so much
Evidence?
yeah, there's so much evidence of the DNA between us and apes and things like that.
So that's what convinced you evolution was true?
Yeah.
They've got DNA.
Yeah.
Pigs have got DNA.
Well, yeah, but not as close to us.
So that means we evolved from apes? Could it mean that God created apes and he also created man? Could it mean that God designed all the animal kingdom with the same DNA type structure?
It could.
Right? You don't know what
Not sure.
Maybe. Would you change your mind if I showed you evidence God exists?
Maybe.
Okay, you believe in logic?
Yes.
I'm going to be very logical, okay?
Right.
How about you see the painting of the sun?
Yeah.
Do you believe it was a painter?
Yes.
Can you see him?
No.
Touch him?
No.
Taste him?
No.
Smell him?
No.
How do you know there was a painter?
Was it there?
Because the painting was there.
Yeah.
See that building?
Yeah.
You think there was a builder?
Yeah.
Can you see him?
Yeah.
Touch him?
No.
Taste him?
No.
Smell him?
No.
But you believe he exists. Why?
Because it's there.
Because the building's there? Okay, look at creation. How do you know there's a creator? Carry the logic on.
Because it's there.
Because it's there.
Yeah.
The most intelligent scientists can't create a grain of sand from nothing. We can't create an atom. You know that? You try to make an ant from nothing, or a frog, or a flower, or a bird, or a tree, we don't know where to start. Then if you lose an eye, science go, hey, go to the eye hospital, they've got plenty of eyes. Scientists are making eyes, you just slip them in. They don't know how to do it. 150
Okay. Basically, you guys get where he's going with that. But actually, scientists with stem cells have been starting to grow that. So he's not going to be able to say that pretty soon. Basically, his argument there is that because we have common DNA isn't proof of evolution, it's proof that there is a common designer. Kind of like someone using the same ingredients to make different recipes or something like that. Are there any comments on this argument from anyone? Does anyone want to tackle that one?
I can take a swing at it.
Okay, take a swing at it.
The whole commonality of the universe then also lends credence to the commonality of God being both good and evil, having created sin, so on and so forth. So, and by admission of saying that there's a common creator and there is proof of a common creator, then they have to also admit that the devil is a part of the creation. Sin is a part of the creation. Our misery is a part of this engineered creation. So what really is the quality of this God that they're trying to convince us of? So
That still wouldn't necessarily disprove intelligent design, though. I mean, that would definitely be a nice swing at Christianity or other Abrahamic religions. But as far as disproving that it was intelligently designed, it really doesn't. I think I think when it comes to the commonality, it would just show that there was a process to it. It doesn't necessarily prove that they were all created at the exact same time. You would have to prove that they were all created at the exact same time.
Oh,
There's an intelligent designer.
I totally missed my actual argument on that. All things are created from a common strand. It starts off from simplest. I think I've gone over this before. Starts off with the simplest mechanic. The Big Bang, for example, is a few mechanics that occurred and caused this vast explosion. Now, through the assimilation of additional simple particles, elements, so on and so forth, that all have their own simple tasks, those in unison, like a number of those in unison, create a complex function, and then eventually creates a complex life form, a complex structure. You know, the more complicated we get is all based on the acquisition of simpler elements brought together to work in unification. So that's really, if you want to argue I guess if I were to argue that, I would say that I would take it all the way back to the Big Bang and assert that in order for that to be true, God would have to be the simplest, most inane, words escaping me. He would have to be the most inane, simple, mechanical function to have actually triggered all this.
Okay.
And not worth any kind of reverence.
Aron?
If you want to call that a god, that's not really much of a god.
Aron, question. What did you think of his rebuttal? What do you think of JD's rebuttal?
It was a bit hard to follow. I mean, anything that you see that has the ability to reproduce and change will eventually become more diverse, and it not only more diverse, but some factions of that diversity are going to become more complex.
Okay. Does anyone want to take a shot at rebutting it before Aron knocks it down? And we move on to another argument? DPR?
I'm so much better at writing.
I think one of the difficulties here is, and this is why you're doing this show, is that obviously appealing to ignorant people who don't know the subject is very easy, and it's something that Ray Comfort does very well. But to try and JD, I'm terribly sorry, it's really irritating me. Can you mute your mic when you're not talking, because I'm getting a huge load of noise from your keyboard. It's all right, I've been saying that to Aron for 3 years. But the argument that cannot ever be addressed is God did it. And even if you come up with evidence for evolution, it's still unarguable that, well, their case that God did it in this way is unarguable. You cannot defeat that argument, because God could have used the same blueprint to produce everything. He could have deliberately tricked us into believing that evolution happened by putting ERVs in the same place in chimps and humans. He could have fused, I think it's chromosome number 2 in humans, so we have one less chromosome than the great apes. He could have done all of this, and if you're dealing with someone who has the attitude, God could have done it that way, then I don't think there is any argument that is going to succeed. And that's the difficulty that you're facing with these, what I would describe as belligerent creationists.
And on my perspective on that, yes, you can defeat that argument. The argument is that it's not presented with evidence, which means it can be dismissed without evidence. When people say that, well, God can do this, God can do whatever you want, the simple question to destroy that is, how do you know that? You don't. You just assume it. You assume there's a God. You assume he can do whatever he wants. You assume he has magic powers. You assume all sorts of things which are not indicated. Now, I am not able to assert anything other than God to have these same sorts of powers, because anything that I would have done as a counter-argument would be considered dishonest for the exact same reason. If it's not supported by evidence, then it is a lie and it is a fraud. Why is religion treated differently? Why do they get to lie in fraud and not be called out for it? No, you don't get to say that there's a God. You don't get to say that he can do whatever he wants. You don't get to say, well, he could have done that. How do we know he could have done that? Let's ask the question, could God have done that? How do we know? How do we find out? How do we verify that? You can't, because there's nothing there. There's no substance to it whatsoever.
Okay, I want to address the science itself of what his claim is, that DNA is proof of a common designer and not proof of evolution. And I wanted me and Shara to try and rebut that science first, and JD's already taken a stab at it, and DPR, and then Aron can talk about why that is scientifically horse feathers. Okay?
I do want to point out, though, if we're going to talk about the DNA thing, back when I was somebody who completely understood evolution, I understood that it was something that was, but I didn't understand why. Then I became a creationist because I read a stupid book. One of the arguments that won me over to be a creationist again was the fact that they were saying that DNA has so much information in it. So much information that if it was to be in a bunch of books, it would like fill a football stadium full of information. How does that just happen? And so that was a convincing argument to me back in the day, that because there's so much information in DNA that it couldn't just boom happen like that.
Okay, I know where you're coming from with that, and that's with the DNA having information, that's just a product of DNA replicating and copying errors and duplicate DNA duplication, and of course over time you're going to get more complex DNA. And having complex DNA isn't necessarily a sign that you're more evolved or more superior species. Some very simple organisms have huge amount of information on their DNA because we carry junk DNA too. I want to talk about Comfort's argument in particular, that it's proof of a common designer. What I want to try to explain what he's why this fools people. He's saying that that pigs have DNA, humans have DNA, chimps have DNA, and that's just the building blocks God used to. Let's say you have ABC, you have building blocks with A through Z on them, and you put your building blocks together differently, and you get different shapes. That's what he's saying. The DNA, you put it together in different ways, and God put it together in different ways, and you get different species. So the rebuttal to that is, if that's the case, then I don't mean to steal Aron's thunder here, but if that's the case, why are there why is there junk DNA? And if God's just assembling DNA to make different things, abracadabra, why is and they didn't evolve, and things are that way because things gave birth to other things, then why is there junk DNA? Why is there endogenous retrovirus insertions in our DNA at the same spots that our most closest evolutionary relatives have? How am I doing, Aron?
Well, can I just butt in before Aron jumps in, if I may, very quickly?
Okay.
I think that DNA is proof of a common designer. It's just how loosely you use the word designer. It is proof of a common natural source. Designer replace for nature. I think you've got the answer.
Well, remember that Ray Comfort is deliberately obtuse. He is trying very, very hard not to understand these things. He says, okay, humans have DNA and apes have DNA, big deal. Pigs also have DNA. What he's refusing to acknowledge, and you know that he knows this, so he's being deliberately dishonest in his misrepresentation, He knows that there are ERVs in the DNA, and he knows that the DNA is not just a set of instructions, but it's also an indication of how the DNA developed. It shows a string of mutations. It shows deactivated primate genes in the human genome that are shared with other primates. We still have them. They just don't work in us. Going back further, one of the genes that don't work in any primate, that this is one of the things that we share in common, is our inability to synthesize vitamin C. There's several different types of mutations that precede our origin in primates, and then that are passed throughout primates, and then that only exist within certain sets of primates. And these instructions serve as a signature, as DPRJones was putting it. I mean, if God were doing this, then God has signed a document saying that he had nothing to do with this, or God is signing a document to the effect that he's giving his testament that an evolutionary process was behind it. And if you want to imagine that God controls everything, like the reason that you lose or find your keys, then God could easily be behind the entire evolutionary process. But the genetic code, as they put it, is... And the only way that I could see to read it with the types of information that is involved in there is that it's giving a set of instructions, not just for how the animal is created, but also how that string of genetic patterns and mutations in ERVs was constructed over time. It's clear indication of an evolution. It is a signature of an evolution.
I know I watched Richard Dawkins. He was cutting open a giraffe neck, and he was explaining how I can't remember what part of the throat, but you could see that it traveled, did a loop in some way, like so that it
was a nerve.
Do you guys know what I'm talking about?
It's a nerve that runs down the entire throat and then back up again.
Is that what it is?
Around the carotid artery.
And it's because the neck evolved to get longer and longer, and so the nerves actually ended up being this weird loop, and that is a sign. So when we talk about DNA, you're basically saying that this is a signature that's in DNA, much like there's a signature in the construction of our bodies. There's a similar kind of imprint. Anybody?
Yeah, and another thing that you can look at is not just the way that the genetic ERVs and point mutations and dysfunctional genes and junk DNA and all like this all indicate an evolutionary pattern. You can also look at the morphology too. There are things that could only make sense how they would have arrived from an evolutionary pattern, and that an intelligent designer would not have done it this way. And ironically, one of the creationist arguments is that the tongue of the woodpecker, of a particular type of woodpecker, doesn't come out of its beak straight out. It wraps around its skull first and then comes out through a nostril. It's some really weird distortion of how this thing... Now, they talk about how evolution couldn't have done this. Ironically, the argument is evolution could not have done this because it doesn't make any sense. Therefore, God must have done it. The intelligent designer constructed something that looks exactly like some freakish accidental mutation that the animal somehow, luckily enough, managed to survive and procreate anyway. God created this monstrosity that makes no sense because he's an intelligent designer, because something that naturally creates nonsensical monstrosities couldn't possibly have done this. And that is their argument.
That's actually one of the things that has always confused me, because they always talk about intelligent design and all this stuff. A lot of creatures are very freakish, and they have a lot of things about them that don't make very much sense. Why would an intelligent designer design things that they're not necessary, they're not needed? There's even organs in our body that are unnecessary, unless that's untrue. That's what I've heard, though. There's parts of our body that are unnecessary.
Well, yeah, there are. I mean,
take for example the genes. Sorry, take for example the genes that are still extant in chickens, for chickens to make teeth. Now, what the creationists will argue is, well, God was just using the same blueprint, and rather than just remove that, he just sort of like made it non-functional. And again, this goes back to the point I made at the beginning. If you're prepared to open your mind sufficiently that your brain falls out, you're going to accept this sort of argument. Yeah, God was just using the same blueprint. The genes are there, but he turned them off.
The problem really isn't that whether you have an open mind or not. The problem is that actually that the people that are telling us to have an open mind are the definition of a closed mind. Remember that every creationist organization posts their declaration of faith wherein they admit that they will never admit any evidence against them. They state flat out, they will never admit when they are wrong. They will accept any evidence that supports their conclusion simply because it supports their conclusion. Not in the veracity or authenticity of any of it. They accept it simply because it supports their conclusion, and they reject anything that opposes it simply because it opposes it, because it is confirmation bias. They have in what is actually true, and they are not in any sense trying to be objective in their analysis. It is a completely dishonest view of life in any process.
Well, in that case, it becomes obvious that we're arguing with insanity here. So it's frankly impossible to argue with insanity. So is there a way to approach that?
One definition of insanity would be, or one definition of sanity would be the ability to be reasonable and to be reasoned with. But when you stated in advance that reason will not change your mind, then yes, you are arguing a form of insanity.
If I can refocus here, I think everybody knows that Ray Comfort's apologetics and his pseudoscience are seemingly crazy, right? That's not what we're hoping to accomplish here. What we're hoping to accomplish, is for people who might be fooled by pseudoscience, to show the argument, why these arguments are scientifically invalid. That way they don't fool people who otherwise might be fooled. Like Shara was telling me her story. Both me and her are former Christians, and we converted later in life. And some of these pseudoscience arguments were persuasive to us because we grew up in we didn't receive a good science education, and anyone with basic knowledge of evolution can see why these things are false. And what helped me was when I was a Christian, I started going online to Christian forums, to the Creation Evolution forum, and I was an absolute beginner. I would say, why were there still monkeys if we evolved from monkeys, that kind of thing, because I'm 42, and I grew up before the internet, and the internet wasn't around until I was like 25.
I used that argument too, just so you know.
And I went to the Crevo forum, and Aron was there, and other atheists were there, and they could show me why these things I was saying that I was raised to believe was wrong. So I'm not trying to make the case that anybody making these arguments is insane. A lot of us already know that. What I'm trying to do is to help people whenever their relatives talk to them, or whenever they have a problem at school, their teachers teaching horse feather creationism, that they can articulately rebut this. And that's what we're working through, some arguments. And obviously everybody here is at different levels of being able to rebut pseudoscience. So don't kind of like, if somebody says something that is wrong, and Aron comes back and says, well, no, that's wrong. Everybody starts at a different level, and it's okay. As long as you keep debating it, as long as you keep getting knowledge, you're going to advance. So that's what I'm focusing on. I don't want to talk about.
I agree entirely. I agree entirely, but I think you've actually identified one of the problems with dealing with the arguments. If someone's ears are closed to the argument for whatever reason, then it doesn't matter what you say. But I know that you have a list of other arguments. Should we take a few of those and see where we get to with those?
Sure. And I'm going to say that all of us here have run across a really stubborn, pig-headed creationist who, no matter what you say, they're not going to change their mind. But there are people who watch these things too. There are lurkers. There's people like me who are misinformed. And when I argued it out with Aron, he was able to show me why I was wrong. And there's people who the truth matters to. There are rational people, emotional people, but there's people like me and Shara who the truth matters to. All right, let's try another one. Okay. PZ Myers posted one 2 days ago. It's related to the common designer argument. It's Casey Luskin. Let me screen share it with you so that you can see what I'm talking about. Just a second here.
Yeah, and I just want to say, this is exactly where I came from. Where same thing with Lilandra. I was a person who believed this stuff, but I did actually state numerous times that I'm open-minded and I will accept any evidence that anybody shows me. You know, so whenever you talk to somebody, it might be a good idea to find out if they are open-minded or not, because I would state very clearly that I do want to know, and if you can prove me wrong, please do. So look for those people to discuss stuff with.
Okay, Casey Luskin, in case you don't know who that is from the Discovery Institute, and they put out a lot of pseudoscience, and they misinform a lot of otherwise intelligent people. And what he's talking about here is that Casey Luskin said that there been an analysis of the coelacanth, which is a kind of lobe-finned fish. Like, I'm trying to think of some examples so you can picture what I'm talking about, but just let me go on. And he said there are some Hox genes. If you don't know what a Hox gene is, a Hox gene is the genes that that regulate how an embryo forms with a certain body plan. Like ourselves, we're tetrapods. We have 4 limbs and a head, and Hox genes make sure we don't come out with six limbs, stuff like that. It regulates body plan. And anyways, coelacanths have in their DNA the same Hox genes associated with us, with other vertebrates, and when they analyze this. And if you think about it, that makes sense from an evolutionary standpoint, because coelacanths have these fins that have kind of like the beginnings of what we have, shoulders, and they're able to move their fins. And Luskin basically says that's not proof of evolution. He says that's proof that since they have the same Hox genes, that there's a common designer. It's basically related to Ray Comfort's argument. Am I being coherent, you guys? You know where I'm coming from?
Yeah, I understand what you were saying. I was just noticing that on the podcast.
I was shaking my head because I was.
Okay. Awesome. Okay. So he's basically making the same argument that Ray Comfort is making, that that's not proof of anything. That's proof of a common designer. That coelacanths and other tetrapods have homologous. I don't want Aron to make fun of me. Homologous Hox genes. They have the same Hox genes for the way their bodies develop as an embryo. And there's a quote I remember: everything in biology makes sense in light of evolution. And it doesn't make sense to me that they would have the same genes and they're going to form the same way as an embryo as there's a common designer. That the common designer argument makes no sense to me. Does anybody else want to tackle what Casey Luskin says?
Well, can you frame his argument a little bit more simpler for me? Because like I've tried to explain, although I have tried to study science quite a bit, my way of coming over was to tackle this whole idea of God. I understand evolution very, very, very little bit, so I need a little more of a help.
Okay, let me help frame it a little simpler for you. You have 2 arms, 2 legs, and your head. But normally, when you say tetrapod, tetra means 4. All humans come out that way, unless there's some kind of weird mutation. And the reason for that is that you have Hox genes that control how many limbs you have when you're developing. Like birds are tetrapods too. They have 2 wings, 2 legs, and there's a reason for this because of evolution. And so every tetrapod has this same kind of Hox gene that makes sure that they have the 4 limbs. Is that basic enough?
And so they're basically using this to say that shows that we're intelligently designed?
No, they're using it in a way to say that God made us all the same way. There's a common designer. And the reason why we all have four limbs is because God magically poofed us all that way with 4 limbs. Not that we developed that way because of our evolutionary past and our ancestors. We're all related to the coelacanth.
I think
See, I would have no idea how to argue that at all.
Okay. Go ahead, DPR.
Oh, sorry. At a much more basic level, an architect designs a building and has his blueprint, lines across it showing walls and whatever. He's then asked, can you design another building? And he uses exactly the same blueprint, but this person wants an extension on it. So he uses the same blueprint, but just adds a few extra lines. Another person comes along and they say, well, I want something a little bit different. So he uses exactly the same blueprint, but he just takes a corner off here and puts a patio there instead. And what the argument is all of DNA has this underlying common blueprint behind it, and God's just tinkered with it here and there to make the differences between us and other species. That's
and this is exactly the whole point of the show, because right now I hear you saying that, and I know it's bullshit, but I don't know why. I don't know how to explain that it is.
One of the things that makes it bullshit is that these people are arguing that the very traces in the genome that verify that we are apes are being used as evidence that we are not apes. And the things that indicate that we evolved from other apes are now being used as the signature of God from a special creation. It can't be put that way. It simply doesn't work.
So how would I answer back to somebody who was saying this, that oh, it's a similar blueprint for all of these different creatures because they all have 4 limbs, therefore God. I mean, the therefore God part is a huge jump, so let's take out all that. Does that show that there might be some kind of intelligent designer behind everything?
Let's take a smaller step. If you want to explain it to him, you can explain it to him this way. Do you have 2 arms and 2 legs, just like your mother and father, just like your grandfather? And you have those because of genes, right? So you have those because you're related to your mother and father, and you're related to your grandfather. You have some of the same traits as they do. And take that back a little further. Apes have 4 limbs because they're our ancestors. Take it back further. Coelacanths have those movable limbs because, and we have shoulders because we're related to coelacanths.
If I can clarify one thing, apes are a parent category, but when you're looking at when you're talking to lay people and you say look at the apes, I mean you're looking at extant apes, living apes, and living apes clearly are not our ancestors, and neither are coelacanths. Coelacanths just are the 2 species left of coelacanths represent a larger clade that is virtually extinct now. Most fish originally were designed this way. Most fish originally had lungs and lobed fins and all of these other traits, and later you ended up with ray fin fish that didn't have lobes and didn't have lungs. It's not correct to say that coelacanths are relatives as though they were a close relative, and so you don't certainly want to give the impression that they are our ancestors either. because this is a way that things branch out and flower.
Okay, let me clarify. So extant coelacanth, you're trying to say extant, the ones that live right now are not our ancestors. I get that. But is there a coelacanth that's in our ancestry? A species of coelacanth? No?
No. The coelacanths are part of a group called Sarcopterygii, and or Crossopterygii, either name is correct. And from this collective, you have coelacanths, you have other types of lungfish, and you have our ancestors, which were similar, but not coelacanths. Coelacanths is a distinct group, and we did not emerge from them. We emerged from one of the other groups.
So it's a sister group with this same kind of adaptation where they could move their limbs?
Exactly. I mean, the species that is most closely identified with us no longer exists. Coelacanths do exist, but they're not closely allied with us.
Okay, thank you for the correction. Okay, so does that help, Shara? Break it down.
The honest truth is all I can say. I'm gonna say it in my way of how I would say it, and you guys can explain if it's stupid or not. Okay, I would say that it isn't that we all had a common blueprint created by someone. It's that we all had a common ancestor that we all came from, and that's why there's some similarities that we might find.
Right, common ancestor. That's where you got
answer. And also, one way of looking at it is, of course, that even the most die-hard creationist will accept microevolution, which means that they have to accept that mutations take place. Buildings don't reproduce, and reproduce mutations. Living species do that, and I don't know. It seems to me it's just not. It's one of the problems with evolution. I think that there is no one thing that proves it. For me, it is all the threads of evidence for evolution mesh together so coherently, and there is no sensible argument against it that can be made. So it's not just one thing. So this is one of the problems that you face when you're arguing evolution, is that you can't, I think, necessarily rely on simply one thing, but there are so many other strands that you can use. But that involves knowing a lot about the subject, which is why the likes of Ray Comfort get away with hijacking kids on the street who quite clearly don't have an education. Can you imagine, for example, if Ray Comfort had cornered Don Exodus or Aaron or Concordance? You'd never ever see that footage, would you? It's only because they can get people who don't have a full understanding. They might have a mild understanding, but it's difficult, I have to say. But there we go. That's me.
That is the main problem with evolution. It's the kind of the beautiful thing about it, and the problem with it. It's hard to argue evolution because there is so many aspects to it. There's so many layers to it that I cannot. Unless I've like really just sat down and started studying it, but I have to be honest, not that interesting of a subject for me, so I have a hard time absorbing it. I'm more into humanity, psychology, those types of things are the things, and philosophy, theology, all these things are very interesting to me. I have a really hard time sitting through science talks. Like I go, fall asleep.
Blasphemy.
And I know, but it's just, I can't help it. It's just something that I'm not that interested in. But I do understand the basic concept of it, and I understand that it's true. When it comes to these people asking questions, I may come across as an idiot because I can't answer them. And I wish I could, and that's what I'm hoping to get. I want to actually cover this a lot in different aspects when it comes to geological stuff, paleontology, philosophy, everything. I want to be able to argue with these people properly, but it's going to be damn hard for me to do because I need things simplified. And generally science has a hard time simplifying questions for me. So
I know where you're coming from. Whenever P.Z. Myers gives a talk on genetics or something like that, sometimes my eyes cross, right? But I think that everybody, if they understand basic evolution, basic genetics, basic cosmology, they can rebut the most complex sounding, even the one we just did, arguments, because they're just muddying the waters. They don't really know what they're talking about. And this is what I dislike about pseudoscience a lot, is that they never do their own research. They never do their own science. They take what other scientists do and they muddy it up. And they say that doesn't prove what science says it proves. That proves that my God exists. You know, it's incredibly annoying.